In a world where powerful nations and billionaires believe they control the fate of continents, one young leader from Burkina Faso dared to defy them all. Ibrahim Traoré, a soldier, a captain, and now a symbol, has inspired millions across Africa while shaking the foundations of global power. This is not just a story of politics or rebellion. It is a story of courage, strategy, and a people refusing to bow. From secret plots and betrayals to streets filled with hope and defiance, this is the journey of the man the world fears, and the continent rallies behind. If you stand for courage, leadership, and Africa's voice being heard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell to stay updated on more powerful stories like this. In the polished boardrooms of the West, his name is spoken in hushed tones, like a warning. Ibrahim Traoré, a captain from a small landlocked country, yet a figure who unsettles presidents, CEOs, bankers, and generals. Reports cross the tables. Sanctions failing, protests growing, foreign projects burned to the ground. Analysts whisper of contagion, of his defiance spreading like wildfire across Africa. To the powerful, he is chaos, a threat to the order they built brick by brick over centuries, a storm rising from the Sahel. But in the streets of Ouagadougou, his name carries a different weight. Mothers chant it while carrying water on their heads. Youth spray it on walls in bright red paint. Soldiers raise it like a battle cry before dawn patrols. His face, stern, youthful, framed by his red beret, stares out from murals, posters, and flags. For them, he is not chaos, he is hope. How does a man so young, leading one of the world's poorest nations, command such devotion? And why does his image terrify the world's most powerful men? The answer lies in what he dared to do. He inherited a country on its knees, starving, looted, abandoned. Burkina Faso, a nation drained of its gold, trapped under foreign debts, crushed by terrorism creeping from its borders. Where others bowed, he stood. Where others obeyed, he refused. And with every refusal, he drew a line in the sand, against the IMF, against multinational corporations, against billionaires who saw Africa as a laboratory, against generals who sold loyalty for bribes, against the idea that Africa's destiny was not its own. The world saw him as dangerous not because of his weapons, or his economy, or his armies, but because of something far greater, an idea. An idea that Africa could rise again. That Sankara's ghost had not been buried. That a new generation, born in hunger but raised in defiance, would not bow. This is why Africa rallies behind Ibrahim Traoré. And this is why the world fears him. But his path was never simple. Each act of defiance carried a price. Each victory drew blood. And what he did next would change Africa forever. Ibrahim Traoré's story begins in the shadows of history. Born in a nation that had seen dreams crushed and hope stolen, he grew up in the dust and heat of Ouagadougou's neighborhoods, where hunger was not an abstraction, but a constant companion. Children chased each other through dirt streets, their laughter sharp, brief, and often broken by the groans of families struggling for a single meal. From an early age, Traoré witnessed the stark inequality that defined his country. Aid shipments that never reached villages, infrastructure projects that lined foreign pockets, and local leaders silenced when they dared speak against it. He learned that courage often came with consequences, and survival demanded sharp eyes, faster reflexes, and a relentless mind. Military service was his crucible. The uniform became more than clothing. It was a symbol, a shield, and a promise. Traoré rose quickly through the ranks, not for ambition, but because he saw a void in leadership, a gap between the people's need and the government's action. He learned to move silently, to read intentions, to anticipate betrayal, and to act decisively when others hesitated. By the time he stepped into a leadership role, Burkina Faso was teetering on collapse. The shadows of colonial exploitation had never fully lifted. Gold mines fed foreign companies while locals went hungry. Cotton, cocoa, and other crops enriched distant markets. The IMF pressed harder each year, demanding repayment on loans that left the nation weaker. Each negotiation carried implicit threats: austerity, privatization, and the silent promise that non-compliance would bring consequences that could not be ignored. Yet the people, weary of submission, began to notice Traoré. In the early days, it was small, a resolved nod during a speech, a soldier refusing a bribe, a village council implementing local projects under his oversight. These whispers of integrity spread like embers, igniting hope in hearts that had forgotten its warmth. But the higher he rose, the sharper the threats became. Behind closed doors, foreign powers strategized. Boardrooms and embassies hummed with discussions about how to curb this rising influence. Political pressure was paired with financial strangulation. Threats were subtle at first, aid withheld, media campaigns discrediting his moves, then more direct, covert operations, cyber attacks, and promises of power to those within his inner circle who might betray him. And betrayals came. 3 generals, once loyal, began meeting in shadowy rooms, whispering of coups, plotting to remove Traoré from command. They were tempted by gold, weapons, promises of safety abroad, and the seductive idea of being rewarded by the same powers that had long exploited the nation. Meanwhile, the people's suffering deepened. Mothers walked miles for water. Children studied by candlelight, their stomachs empty. Famine spread silently, a creeping shadow over fields once fertile. Yet in every village, every market, every dusty street, the people spoke of Traoré. They painted his image on walls. They chanted his name. They began to believe in something many had forgotten existed, a future shaped by Africans, not outsiders. Traoré's resolve hardened in this crucible. He knew that leadership demanded more than courage. It demanded vision, discipline, and a willingness to sacrifice comfort and safety. He began to plan, not for himself, but for a movement that could withstand foreign pressure, resist internal betrayal, and rally the people behind a singular purpose: sovereignty, dignity, and the assertion that Africa's destiny would not be written in distant capitals. Every decision carried weight. Every glance at the generals reminded him of potential betrayal. Every telegram from foreign embassies was a coded ultimatum. And every village visit, every speech, every act of defiance added fuel to a growing fire that threatened not only to transform Burkina Faso, but to inspire the entire continent. By the end of this setup, Traoré was no longer just a rising soldier. He was a lightning rod for change. The world watched, unsettled. His people believed in him, electrified by hope. The generals plotted, the foreign powers calculated. And in the shadows, the first sparks of rebellion, resistance, and fear began to intertwine, setting the stage for a confrontation that could not be avoided. The air in Ouagadougou thickened with tension. Rumors of foreign-funded sabotage spread like wildfire through the city. Newspapers barely disguised their concern with neutral headlines. Political unrest brewing. Africa's young leader faces challenges. But those who watched closely saw the truth. The world feared him, Ibrahim Traoré, in his military uniform and red beret, moved through the streets not as a symbol but as a living testament to resistance. Soldiers flanked him, eyes alert, weapons ready, yet there was something different in their gaze. Not fear, but conviction. For the first time in decades, loyalty ran deeper than money, deeper than threats, deeper than the allure of foreign promises. The first sign of real danger came from within. 3 generals, once his trusted lieutenants, met in secrecy, shadows stretching across the walls of an abandoned warehouse. Maps were spread across rusted tables, contracts slid across, with subtle glances, whispers of betrayal heavier than the night itself. They plotted to remove Traoré, convinced that the West's backing would secure their success. Meanwhile, the people's movement swelled. Markets were filled with banners of red and green. Murals of Traoré appeared overnight, his stern face, and red beret painted on walls from dusty villages to city centers. Children repeated his speeches, teachers quoted his words, and even the poorest farmers began to see a new possibility, that they might have a say in their own destiny. Outside, foreign powers acted. Embassies sent coded messages. Cyber attacks disabled communication networks. Aid shipments mysteriously vanished. Analysts calculated that Burkina Faso would buckle within months. But every measure only strengthened Traoré's resolve. He began to understand a critical truth. Fear and oppression only fuel the fire of the truly determined. The generals within his ranks moved forward with subtle precision. One night, Traoré's intelligence units intercepted a plan. Sabotage during a nighttime city inspection. Explosives were planted, messages of betrayal delivered, and loyal soldiers would be lured away. Traoré, ever vigilant, discovered the plot. Instead of retaliation, he chose strategy. He walked through the streets the following day, red beret on, uniform crisp, greeting villagers, shaking hands, speaking to soldiers. The very presence of Traoré became a countermeasure. People whispered his name in awe. He walks among us. He is not afraid. The general's plans began to crumble under the weight of public support, yet danger persisted. Foreign-backed mercenaries infiltrated the city, attempting to seize communication hubs and broadcast misinformation. Rumors of famine, unrest, and rebellion were amplified to confuse and divide the populace. In the midst of this chaos, Traoré held secret meetings in dimly lit rooms with his closest advisors, mapping responses, anticipating each move like a master strategist in a high-stakes game of chess. At the same time, ordinary citizens bore the consequences of foreign interference and internal betrayal. Villages faced shortages. Children went to bed hungry. Yet, instead of despair, a collective resilience emerged. Mothers whispered his name for courage. Elders told stories of Sankara alongside Traoré. And youth took to the streets to organize local defense and public awareness. As weeks passed, the tension reached a crescendo. Generals attempted subtle power grabs, foreign interference increased in intensity, and the people's loyalty became both shield and weapon. Traoré, in every public appearance, every silent inspection, every speech from the rooftops, demonstrated a resolve that seemed almost preternatural. The stage was set. Betrayal, rebellion, and foreign pressure converged on one axis. Traoré's decision to act decisively would determine the future not only of Burkina Faso, but of a continent that had been waiting for a spark. And the spark would come, unstoppable and fierce. Night had fallen over Ouagadougou, thick and suffocating when the conspirators made their move. Three generals, once Traoré's closest allies, gathered their loyal units, preparing to seize key government buildings and topple the young leader. Across town, foreign-backed operatives moved in silence, their steps calculated, eyes scanning, every rooftop, every alley. But Traoré was ready. Dressed in his military uniform and iconic red beret, he walked through the corridors of the presidential palace with a calm that belied the storm outside. Advisors whispered of impending danger, but he only nodded, eyes fixed on the city beyond. He understood that fear is a weapon, and that the people's belief in him could be a shield stronger than any wall or gun. The first clash came at the central communications hub. Explosions shattered the night, glass raining down, sparks igniting the dry streets. Traoré's soldiers, trained not just in combat but in strategy and loyalty, fought fiercely, defending every position with precision. The general's betrayal was met with unexpected resistance. Each calculated move was anticipated, countered, and neutralized. Traoré himself appeared at strategic points, not hiding behind guards but leading. His presence galvanized the city's defenders and terrified the traitors. Villagers, aware of the danger, lined the streets as human shields, holding banners and chanting his name. The sight of the young captain in uniform, red beret catching firelight, inspired courage in every heart, making the conspirators' advance falter. Inside the palace, a tense standoff unfolded. The generals confronted Traoré directly, their faces pale but determined, their hands betraying subtle tremors as they presented ultimatums and threats. Traoré's gaze did not waver. With steady words, he disarmed not just their rhetoric, but their confidence, exposing the weakness behind their bravado. Outside, the people's voices surged, echoing through the streets like thunder. Mothers, children, and soldiers united into a living wall, preventing the conspirators from advancing further. Flames from small barricades illuminated the night sky, creating a cinematic spectacle of defiance, unity, and hope. The confrontation intensified. Gunfire echoed, explosions shook the streets, and chaos threatened to consume the city. Yet, in the midst of the storm, Traoré's calm, decisive leadership prevailed. Generals were captured or fled, their plans in ruins. Foreign operatives retreated, humiliated and exposed. The betrayal had been met not with panic, but with courage, a courage magnified by the people's unwavering faith in their leader. By dawn, the streets of Ouagadougou were littered with remnants of the battle, burned vehicles, shattered buildings, and flags waving defiantly above the smoke. Traoré stood atop the palace steps, uniform pristine, red beret gleaming, facing the city. The people erupted in chants, their voices a tidal wave of unity and triumph. The world watched in disbelief. Analysts, diplomats, and media outlets struggled to process what had just occurred. One young captain had defied generals, foreign powers, and economic sanctions, and emerged victorious. The message was clear. Ibrahim Traoré could not be intimidated, and Africa had found a leader who refused to bow. In that moment, the young captain transcended the ordinary. He became a symbol, a living emblem of defiance, courage, and hope. The people's rally had transformed from mere support to a movement, sweeping beyond Burkina Faso's borders, inspiring millions across the continent. And as the first light of morning broke over the city, Traoré raised his hand, not just to signal victory, but to mark a turning point. Africa had witnessed a demonstration of power unlike any before. Unity, courage, and the indomitable spirit of its people. The world would never forget the night a young leader in military uniform and red beret stood firm against all who sought to control him. The sun rose slowly over Ouagadougou, painting the city in hues of gold and red. The streets, still littered with remnants of the previous night's battle, carried a new energy. Smoke curled gently from barricades and fires that had long burned out. Yet the air was filled not with fear, but with resolve. Ibrahim Traoré, in his military uniform and red beret, stepped onto the balcony of the presidential palace. He surveyed the city, his eyes calm but vigilant. The people's cheers swelled, a tidal wave of unity, gratitude, and hope. Mothers held children on their shoulders, youth waved flags, and soldiers stood at attention. This was no longer merely a victory over traitors. It was the affirmation of a nation's spirit, a reclaiming of sovereignty that had been denied for decades. Across the world, the response was starkly different. In Washington, Paris, and London, diplomats and military strategists huddled in crisis meetings. How could a single young leader defy generals, foreign operatives, and economic pressures, and survive? Analysts debated, papers were drafted, and contingency plans prepared. Traoré had proven something unsettling. Africa could resist, and it could do so with intelligence, courage, and unity. The realization unsettled the global order. Within Burkina Faso, the aftermath of the confrontation was more nuanced. Resources were scarce, infrastructure damaged, and the economy strained. Yet the people walked taller. The narrative had shifted. No longer passive victims of history, they were participants in their own destiny. Villagers rebuilt with one hand and planted crops with the other. Teachers used Traoré's speeches as lessons in courage and civic responsibility. Children repeated his words with pride. We will not bow. We are the authors of our own future. Traoré himself was transformed. Leadership had always been a burden, but now it was also a mantle of inspiration. He traveled among the people, not in ostentatious vehicles or lavish security convoys, but on foot and by vehicle, listening, observing, learning. Every handshake, every conversation reinforced a simple truth. He did not rule by fear. He ruled by example, and the people trusted him implicitly. The generals who had betrayed him were exiled or imprisoned. Foreign powers, humiliated in public and private, reassessed their strategies. Intelligence operations that once assumed compliance from African leaders now faced the reality of unpredictability. Traoré had not just survived, he had reshaped perceptions, proving that young visionary leadership could stand against centuries of manipulation. Across the continent his legend grew. In Mali, youth protests echoed his words. In Nigeria, civic leaders referenced his defiance. In Senegal, musicians wrote songs of his courage. Traoré became a symbol, a living monument to the idea that Africa could reclaim its narrative. Not with weapons alone, but with unity, vision, and resilience. Yet he remained vigilant. Shadows lingered at the borders. Rumors of assassination attempts persisted, and the global elite watched him warily. Traoré understood that leadership was eternal vigilance. But for every shadow there was light, communities empowered, people inspired, and a nation rising from despair to purpose. In the quiet moments, when the crowds had gone and the city slept, Traoré reflected on what had been accomplished. The coup had failed, foreign powers had been thwarted, the people rallied, and yet the real victory was intangible. Belief. Belief that Africa could rise. belief that its youth, its soldiers, its mothers, and its visionaries could shape destiny rather than be shaped by it. History would remember the night of the uprising, but the story did not end there. It continued in every school, every market, every village, and every street. Africa had witnessed a young leader defy expectation, challenge the global order, and emerge victorious. And the question lingered, whispered in the winds over the Sahel, across the savannah, and through every city and town. If one young man can stand, who else will rise? If one nation can defy, what could an entire continent achieve? Ibrahim Traoré, military uniform pristine, red beret firm, looked out over his country. He did not claim to be Africa's savior. He claimed only to be a servant of its people. Yet in the hearts of millions, he had become much more, a symbol of courage, a beacon of hope, and a warning to those who thought the continent could ever be controlled again. The world feared him. Africa rallied behind him. And in that balance, a new chapter had begun, one that history would not forget.